Okay, it's not giving us the countdown, so we're just going to hope that this is all working out. Good morning, class. We are continuing with our Chapter 5, Social Studies Key Terms. So remember, a lot of these things we need to know for the test that is on Wednesday. What can you tell me about the profits? And we will have to recalibrate later. So what can you tell me about the profit? Katie.
The money made after the debt is subtracted from the total.
Yeah, the money is that you make on something after you subtract out the cost. Resources. What is the resource, Nick?
Is a source or supply of useful materials you can find.
That's the source of supply of useful materials. Who is the fur trader? What can you tell me that we've learned about fur traders? Paisley.
European or American involved in fur trade.
And it often refers to the person that's in charge of the trading post. Being that European, it's typically somebody from a wealthy family, so they can afford to buy that fur trade post, and they're usually educated, so they know how to read and write. A pelt, Katie.
The skin of the fur.
Yes, the animal skin with the fur still on it. So who's a pelt preparer? Is he?
Usually a woman who scrapes the skin off the animal without ruining it and then putting it out.
Yeah, so it's typically an American Indian woman who knows how to take the pelt off of the animal in a way that's going to protect it and save the pelt, and then they turn it inside out so that way the pelt, the fur is going to be protected and they'll get the most money for it. Who is a hunter? Gregory.
Usually, men who hunt animals
Yeah, it's typically a male, an American Indian who hunted for their living. Like that was their job that they did. They did a lot of their hunting and trapping in the winter because that's when the animals' pelts have the most fur on it to keep them warm. Who is a guide? Tristan.
A guide is someone that will lead someone else that is not familiar with what landscape they're on. Guide that helps them through.
So the guide was typically an American Indian who would guide the Voyagers through the wilderness because they didn't know the area. The interpreter, Caitlin.
A person who translates, usually an American Indian.
Yeah, typically it was the American Indian, and they would know multiple languages, so they could translate between the fur trader and the American Indians. A lot of times, the women, remember they were trying to form those kinship bonds, so the American Indian women would marry the European fur traders, and so they would learn the multiple languages, and so then they would act as those interpreters. Who is the clerk? Katie.
It's somebody, usually a young person who was who wanted to become a fur trader, or also called a wintering partner.
Yeah.
And they helped with the day-to-day business.
Yes.
Fur trading post.
So it's typically a younger man, European, from a wealthy family and educated. They could read and write. They took care of the day-to-day business at the trading post, and they were hoping to be able to own their own trading post. So they were working towards their own trading post. The Voyager, Paisley.
A workman who performed the basic labor of the fur trade, including transporting beaver pelts and or trade goods by canoe.
Yeah, so it was the workmen, typically like French Canadian or European, who did the physical aspect of the trading business. So they had to carry, they had to canoe, so they had to be strong and fit. They typically weren't very well educated. They didn't know how to read and write. And they traveled by either walking or by the waterways, by canoeing places. There's one more role that is not on here, and that's the supplier. What did the supplier do? What can you tell me, Nathan?
The supplier supplied supplies.
Yeah, and who typically was the supplier? The American Indians or the Europeans?
European, right?
Nope. The American Indians, because the Europeans are coming over here and they need supplies to be able to survive the winter. So the suppliers supplied the food and the canoes and the clothes to the Europeans so they can make it through the winter. So the suppliers supplied the Europeans with the supplies that they needed for the winter. Katie?
Weren't they also usually women?
A lot of times they were women because they were the ones that took care of growing the food and making the clothes. So the women played a big role with that also. Which three of those roles were typically Europeans? Caitlin? Paisley?
Voyager, fur trader, and
The clerk. The Voyager, the fur trader, and the clerk. Those were typically the Europeans. Remember, we need to be able to say a sentence about each of those. So we have 5 left for the American Indians. So we have the hunter, the guide, the interpreter, the pelt preparer, and the supplier. So those were the Ojibwe and Dakota roles in the fur trade business. Today we're going to go and look at a life within the Voyagers, not a day. Look at what life was like for a Voyager. It sounds pretty cool to be like, oh, I'm going through the wilderness, I'm transporting stuff, I'm living in nature, that's awesome. It was not an easy job at all. It was very dangerous, and it was very hard on the body, the conditions that they had to go through. So we're going to just get kind of an idea of what it was like to be a Voyager. As we're doing the reading, we'll see that there are diary entry ideas. That's something that we're going to talk about after the test on Thursday, about creating in small groups, creating a diary of the Voyagers and what their life was like. So page 90 in your book, page 90, Trading Places with a Voyager. Voyagers were the workmen who carried the weight of the fur trade on their backs. Who were these men? What was it like to be a Voyager? Unfortunately, few Voyagers could read or write, so they left no diaries that described their experiences. In order to explore what a Voyager's life might have been like, we must look to documents left behind by others who talked about them. These include employment contracts, diaries, songs, letters, and other accounts. So the job duties of a Voyager. This is a contract that the Voyager named Louis Millet signed. His company had him sign it when he became their employee in 1811. Although few Voyagers could read, they signed contracts to begin work. So listen to the job description of what they had to do. Return trip from Montreal to Fort William. Pass by Mackinac, that's an area, and go to Rainy River. If requested, 6 days of regular labor. Make 2 portages from Fort William to Portage de la Montagne. Remember, portage is when they have to carry the canoe and all of their supplies. So they're going from one waterway to the next, carrying everything. Or, instead of the above, to give 6 days of other labor, assisting carrying the 3-man canoes on land, to exercise due care to deliver the merchandise, livestock, pelts, utensils, and other necessaries to the destination, to promptly and honestly serve, obey, and faithfully execute all that the traders demand, to promote their profitable advantage, prevent harm, and warn them of things that come to their attention, to abstain from private trading, absenteeism, or quitting under pain of law and loss of wages. So think about that. They have to obey whatever the fur trader tells them to do. If they say do this, they have to do it. Otherwise, the law might come after them. If they quit, the law is going to come after them. If they don't hold up their end of the bargain, there's going to be the law coming after them and loss of wages. So they're not going to have any money, and they could be thrown in jail. So not very easy. Okay, whatever the fur trader tells them to do, they have to do it. Just sign here. From the 1650s to the 1850s, Montreal, Canada was a bustling center of the fur trade. It was the place where most Voyagers were hired. When fur companies were looking for new men, they attracted them with advanced pay. So they paid them first, and then they had to do the work to earn it. So that's kind of where that law part comes in, because if you're not doing the work for the money that you've been paid, they're not going to be happy with you. All a man had to do was sign a contract and he would receive 1/3 of his salary. So just for signing, he gets a bunch of money. So it was very appealing to somebody who had no money. He also got equipment such as a blanket, a shirt, a pair of trousers, some handkerchiefs, and tobacco. There was a catch though. The Voyager might sign up for 1 to 3 years, but he would probably build up debts to the company. This would force him to work even longer to pay back his money. So maybe he needs to take out a loan from the company. So then he has to stay longer working for the company to pay off the money that they loaned him. So let's look at page 92. The rhythm of the paddle. Each year in early May, when the ice broke on the St. Lawrence River in Canada, Voyagers started their work. They loaded up canoes bound for western Great Lake posts such as Grand Portage, Mackinac, or Fort William. Once everything was loaded, groups of canoes called brigades pushed off from the docks and headed west. As the men paddled upstream, they often started singing. Their songs helped them keep the rhythm of the stroke and pass the time. In my birch bark canoeing in the cool of the evening I ride, where I have braved every tempest of St. Lawrence's rolling tide. So remember, St. Lawrence is the river. My canoes of bark light as a feather that is stripped from silvery birch, and the seams with roots sewn together, the paddles made of white birch. It's when I come onto the portage, I take my canoe on my back, set it on my head topsy-turvy. It's my cabin, too, for the night. What does that mean if it's their cabin for the night? Nick?
So they're sleeping.
Yeah, they're going to sleep in the canoes. You are my Voyager companion. I'll gladly die within my canoe, and on the grave beside the canyon, you'll overturn my canoe. His heart is beloved of the farmer, the hunter loves his gun, his hound, the musician is a music lover, to my canoe I'm bound. So what's the most important thing for the Voyager? Their canoe. That's what gets them from place to place, and it protects them from the river. Hoping for safety. After leaving Montreal, the brigades would often stop at St. Anne's, a Catholic church. Peter Pond, an early explorer and trader, visited St. Anne's in 1773. His diary describes something most travelers did there, even those who weren't Catholic. This church is dedicated to St. Anne, who protects all voyagers. Here is a small box with a hole in the top for ye reception of a little money for the Holy Father, or to say a small mass for those who put a small sum in the box. Scars of Voyager, but stops here and puts in his smite, and by that means they suppose they are protected. So what is it that the Voyagers would do? There's a box at St. Anne's with a hole in the top. What are they putting into the box? Izzy?
Like maybe they're elevator.
Yeah, they're putting some money into the box. Why are they putting money into the box at the church? What is it that they're wanting to get? Leah? Protection. They're putting money in, and it says for the Holy Father, or to say a small mass. So they want those prayers. And at the end it says, so that they suppose they are protected. They want the prayers to help protect them on their dangerous journey. Because it's not easy, and we're going to find out some of the dangers that they face. So they're asking for prayers. They're putting money in, they're tithing some of their money. So they're hoping to get prayers from the priests there. Katie?
You can also tell that they can't write well because things are capitalized when they weren't supposed to be.
Well, and it was it's called Old English because it's from a long time ago. So things are spelled differently and they capitalize different things. So it looks a little different and sounds just a little different because it's the Old English.
Oh.
Izzy?
I kind of have a connection because my family used to go to St. Anne's Church there, and then my grandma would go there now, and they would always come around with like a basket, and you could like go to the
Yep. Very good. All right, page 94, across the Great Lakes. For voyagers, the trip across the vast waters of the Great Lakes could be dangerous. Strong winds and waves could dash the canoes into the rocky shorelines, tip them into cold water, or even tear them apart. In the summer of 1789, a trader named Jean Perrault waited out a windy day along the western shore of Lake Huron near the town of Mackinac. He and some other men were playing cards when they saw a canoe with a sail coming through some choppy water. When the canoe arrived, a trader named Patterson boasted that he would continue even with the bad weather. An old voyager named Laporte, who was traveling with Patterson, warned against continuing. He pointed out that the canoe was overloaded. There were 11 people on board, including the American Indian woman accompanying Patterson, plus a large white dog. Patterson ordered Laporte to get back in the canoe, and they set off. So some of the people knew that it was dangerous and they shouldn't continue. But Patterson said, nope, we have to do this. We're going. Get back in the canoe and we can handle it. For 20 minutes, Perrault and the others watched the canoe as it bounced between the waves. When they could no longer see the sail, someone rushed to find a telescope. Through the telescope, Perrault saw some debris of the canoe on the water moved by the waves, which confirmed our belief that they had perished. So they found the debris of the canoes. The canoes had been broken apart and they saw pieces of it. Later, Perrault and the others canoed to the shoreline near the site of the accident. So once the waters died down and it was safer, they went to go check on them. We discovered the casks and the bales and the men that the waves had cast here and there along the beach. So when they say the men, they're talking about the bodies of the men. Because when they perished, that's when people died. We disembarked as soon as we arrived, and our first care was to drown the bodies which were rolling in the waves. Mr. Patterson was the farthest away, holding the American Indian woman by his hand, both half buried in the sand, and his dog crouched beside them on the beach. When we undertook to remove them from the beach, the dog interfered. It was necessary to strike him in order to approach them. So they go to the bodies, they're collecting the bodies so they can bury them. And Mr. Patterson's holding the hand of the American Indian woman that was with him, probably his wife. Their bodies are on the beach and the dog is protecting them. So the dog's growling at the people coming to get the bodies because he's trying to protect his owner. And they had to strike the dog because the dog's barking at them. So they had to get the dog away so they could collect the bodies so they could bury them. Why do you think they continued on, even though it was such dangerous weather and choppy water, and they knew that they might not survive? Why did they carry on, Nick?
Because they probably had a time deadline.
Yeah, they had those time deadlines. They were under strict orders that they had to be at a certain place at a certain time. So even though it was bad weather, even though people were warning them, don't do it, they're saying we have to make our deadline. And so they risked it. And they didn't survive. This was not unusual. This happened a lot. Rendezvous. Who remembers what the rendezvous is? We learned about it last week. Katie?
Wasn't it a long celebration near the end of the fur trade?
So it happened in the summertime and it was very long. It happened for weeks. It wasn't just like a celebration. It was the time that they collected all of the pelts that they had been trading throughout the spring. They collect it all and then they ship it off to Europe. So that's when all the pelts get brought together from all the different trading posts and they're able to ship it off. And then they're collecting the supplies coming in from Europe that they're going to be trading in the fall to survive the winter. So it was several weeks long and it happens in the summer. In June, after weeks and sometimes months of travel, it was time to celebrate. Traders, clerks, and voyagers met at the rendezvous, the summer meeting at Grand Portage. Those who arrived from Montreal brought news of friends and family. The men who came from the interior post told stories of the long winter months. In his written recollections, George Nelson, a clerk for the XY Company, described some of the other activities in Grand Portage in 1802. At last, the brigades, remember the groups of canoes, began to come in, and all was business, receiving goods, corn, flour, pork, etc. from Montreal and Mackinac, and furs from the differing wintering posts. Then the gambling, feasting, dancing, drinking, and fighting. So at first it's all business, and then they're partying, and when people party too much, they start fighting. Yeah, it happens. After a couple of weeks to rest, For the winterers to give in their returns and accounts and to make up their outfits, they begin to return again, to run over the same ground, toils, labors, and dangers. So they're there for a few weeks and then they have to head back. Carry on. West of Grand Portage, voyagers faced a challenging series of lakes and portages. Finding a portage was difficult, but missing a portage was worse. The portages helped voyagers avoid obstacles such as waterfalls or rapids, where water flows very fast, usually over rocks. Missing the portage could mean an unwanted trip through dangerous stretch of water. The portages themselves were often slick or muddy. This made for poor footing, which was especially dangerous when combined with the heavy loads the men carried. Wretched blisters, twisted ankles, tender bruises, strained muscles, broken limbs, so they're breaking their arms and legs, and even death were common. Most men could handle this type of work only for a few years, because it's really hard on their body having to do this. The missionary William T. Boutwell described the difficulties of portaging in his diary in 1832. The Musquetoes came in hordes and threatened to carry a man alive or devour him before they could get him away. So it's a type of wild animal. So they hunted as a pack and would either carry the man away to eat him back at wherever their lair is, or they would just devour him right then and there.
Eat somebody.
Yeah, devour them.
Their lair.
Yeah. The rain has made the portage almost impossible for man or beast. The mud, for the greater part of the way, will average ankle deep. So the mud, their foot sinks in all the way up to here. So their whole shoe is stuck in the mud. Think about how mud is. When you get your foot into a big mud pile and you're trying to pull it up and stuck in there, you have to really try to pull. So it could be even deeper. So the mud could be going all the way up to, their mid-leg, and they're trying to pull their foot out. Not easy, as they're carrying all their heavy supplies and their canoe, and they're trying to pull their foot out of that thick mud. In spots, it is difficult to find the bottom, a perfect quagmire. So that's like a sticking spot where they could get stuck forever. They can't find the bottom. There's no ground. So they just keep sinking down lower and lower. Our men looked like renegades, covered with mud from head to foot. Some have lost one leg of the pantaloons, others both. Their shirts and moccasins are a piece full of holes and mud. Face, hands, and necks look like men scarred with the smallpox. So it's not easy. They're losing parts of their pantaloons, their pants. It's getting stuck in the mud and it's ripping. So their pants are ripping off. They're, I'm sure, losing their moccasins, their boots, whatever they're wearing, as they're trying to make it through this mud. It's not easy and it's very dangerous. Winter at the post. At a winter trading post, voyagers spent their days performing various tasks. These included building and repairing shelters, gathering firewood, hunting for and preparing food, and following orders of the clerk and trader. When not working, voyagers faced brutal boredom. Since most voyagers couldn't read, their only entertainment came on religious holidays, on feast days, and at parties. At these events, they could drink, dance, and sing. Deep in winter, boredom might make a voyager crabby or depressed. It might make him question whether he had made the right choice to become a voyager. As early as January, some men started dreaming of next summer's rendezvous. The trader Alexander Mackenzie described his emotions in a 1794 letter. I am fully bent on going down to Grand Portage. I am more anxious now than ever, for I think it's unpardonable in any man to remain in this country who can afford to leave it. What a pretty situation I am in this winter, starving and alone, without the power of doing myself or anybody else any service. So they're stuck. It's the winter time. They're stuck at that winter trading post. Nothing to do, nowhere to go for months, for all of those winter months. And all they can think about is, when is it going to be spring? When can we get to that rendezvous in the summertime where we can be with other people and we can get out and do stuff? It was not an easy life for the Voyager. What we're going to do right now is I'm going to pass out the chapter comprehension page, and I'm going to make it available on Google Classroom. We're going to work on this now and work on it tonight. And I'll give us just a little bit of time tomorrow in class before we correct it, just to make sure you're all finished up. But when it's time to correct tomorrow, whatever you don't have done is going to be marked wrong, and you can earn partial credit back. So it would be good for you to try to get as much of it answered today and tonight that you can. So with that, we're going to say goodbye to our friends that are at home, and we hope you are doing well.